To any present member of this community, it's almost inconceivable that Duke ever could have maintained a policy of racial exclusion. But racial discrimination was once the official practice of this school, as it was of the surrounding region and de facto much of this land. The history of racial exclusion is the history Duke set out to reverse with the admission of the first African American undergraduates.
I had gone to the March on Washington. So when I came to campus, it was kind of hitting the reality of what this was without knowing much about it.
A part of it was the sense that this was an obligation, that we were opening the doors. This was my part of the civil rights movement.
We had no earthly idea of what our role or work might amount to.
It was time for a generation to go.
I would never have ever applied to come here. As far as I knew, it was still
segregated.
Yes.
Yeah.
My father had graduated from Hampton. I thought I was going to be a Hampton pirate. And yet there was this experiment.
The sentiment was overwhelmingly in favor of integration. But it was a little pious, and the feeling was that you let a few students in, that's it.
You had to have an attitude.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And interestingly, most of us came with an attitude. And why is that? Because we were class presidents. Mm-hmm. We were valedictorians.
I was a wide-eyed kid who was fascinated when I looked up at the chapel the first time and saw the spires and said, what in the world am I into? And I didn't see Buddy at the time.
Because he wasn't here.
He wasn't there.
He wasn't here.
And so, as far as I knew, I was it.
My grandmother brought me because my mother had just had twins the week before. And I'd always assumed my mother would take me to college. That did not happen. My grandmother did. She says, I've talked to the women in the dorm, and they will take care of you.
Duke at that time was really a Southern institution.
I was from Durham. Duke was like another whole town away from the town that I had grown up in.
It was a real culture shock.
I was not a fan of Dixie. Dixie was a hallmark of Duke University at its athletic events. And what we began was a process of not standing and shouting, because that was totally out. And it sort of spread through the students, particularly the northern students, because they weren't so attached to that symbol. And you know, the Confederate flag was not your favorite symbol.
I think when we came, the expectation was you couldn't do it. And so people were surprised when you could.
Our experience was much different than the students who came after us,
Even
in
a
a
year
sense,
after.
because we had, there wasn't that nucleus of students to start creating a real community of African American students.
And things were so interesting that I used to keep a bus ticket taped to the bottom drawer of my bureau in the room, because I was prepared to leave.
For me, there was some loneliness, but there was also a tremendous opportunity for leadership and for engagement. And I think it made a difference that we had coordinate colleges, that there was a women's college rather than a co-ed situation when I came in.
When you're a music major, a lot of your time is spent in the practice room. And so there were many things I could say I did not attend. I could say I was not as social as some of my peers?
The focus was on the lab, getting home, and back to the lab. And not having this old ragtag car I was driving at the time break down. That was my only concern.
The first semblance of anything was Sam Cooke, who came.
Now, the African American students were concerned with a number of things, social life. They were concerned about the dances. They wanted a separate dormitory, a separate wing of the dormitory. But this was a conversation, an expression of what they wanted. They were dissatisfied. And they had a black student union, they called it, something like that, and which met, I think, on perhaps a weekly basis, I guess, to provide support and so forth. And I remember Steph McClain and others said they wanted me to identify more closely with the group and so forth. And fine, of course it's yours. It got my support.
The only other things that we had to hold on to were the people who worked. And they were so happy to see us. You know, the smiles on the faces of the people who worked in the cafeteria or who maintained the dormitories, the women who worked as receptionists and would sit and talk to us, those were the go-to people for us.
We had a very intense and intimate engagement with the Black Durham community. We would sit around and just listen to albums, to the big albums, I guess there would have been the 33s, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X. You sit around and listen to it.
We can make the American dream a reality. Everybody must work. Students must work. Faculty members must work. Negroes must work. White people must work. Everybody must get involved in this struggle to get rid of a system that can destroy and is destroying the soul of our nation.
We did not understand why Duke would allow sororities and fraternities to use, at that time, Hope Valley Country Club, which had an openly segregationist membership policy. And so we went to try to talk to President Knight, and he wouldn't talk to us, so we took our books and sat there until he did. We were invisible until we sat down.
There's this extraordinary experience in '68 after Dr. King's assassination, when we have 2,500 students occupying the quadrangle for 4 days and nights in what was called the Vigil. That was a transformative moment at Duke and made possible, I think, a degree of activism that probably had not been here before.
So we started talking with the administration about these things, who listened. To their credit, they listened, but we didn't go anywhere. And so we decided that we would take over the building. We would do it early in the morning. We ran out of the truck, asked the 3 ladies who were in that Allen building to please leave, and that they had our permission to go and call the police. And then we sat. We had some peanut butter and jelly. So finally, into the early afternoon, Ben came to us. Ben Ruffin came and he said, they've acquiesced. They're going to give you what you ask. And for us, you talk about an empowering moment. It was. We were different people when we walked out of that building.
For us, we grew up in a time when African American, when we were black,
Yes.
our teachers cared about it. Well, you
right after Negro.
Right after that, okay. But there were people who believed in us and pushed us and said we could do.
Absolutely.
And I think that's the kind
Absolutely.
of. I think that's what took us through Duke. I think that's took you beyond Duke into where you were.
Exactly. Exactly.
You came to Duke with a very strong sense of yourself.
Yeah.
And a very, this is what I want to
Exactly.
do. And this is what I'm going to do.
Exactly.
And I'm not going to pay
That is
attention
exactly
to
right.
all
That
of
is-
these
that-
peripheral
I think
things.
I think that says it.
I think those days showed how a university could be responsive to a level of moral concern which hadn't been visible ever before.
Essentially what happened by our efforts and our presence and our efforts is that in effect Duke was opened up from being a good regional institution to a world-class university.
I think we are at a position in the long evolution of the African American Studies program where we can claim, you know, some real accomplishment and distinction nationally.
Duke is I think a much better place. Some people look back and say, oh, there's this and that, but Duke is a much better institution now than it was back then, and it was a good institution then.
I've told a number of different presidents that Duke is a really, really good school. It's not great yet. And it will not be great until the measure of the same is parsed out to everybody.
50 years ago, Duke made a commitment, and in the whole history of the 20th century, the change we're about to celebrate is rivaled by only two others for its impact on what Duke has become. Without the move to Durham from Randolph County in 1892, this school would have been nowhere and would probably have failed. Without the transformational gift from James B. Duke in 1924, we would still be a distinguished regional liberal arts college, and without the repeal of racial exclusion policies, this would not be the place where the brightest minds come from every origin to deepen and expand our knowledge of our world. Let's be proud of Duke's remarkable progress, and let's be resolved to speed this progress on.